Good morning, everyone. You all look absolutely wonderful, beautifully turned out, lovely colours. That is so important, it does help. We have here, as you know, I'm a great aficionado of colour. We have here with us Baroness Garden, to my right, Kristina Cunningham, I'll give you a longer introduction soon, David Bearfield, Professor Stephen Hagen, right at the end, Hagen? We're doing Hagen, we're doing English, and Adam Marshall. Nice to meet all of you properly. Now, what is going to happen now is that they're going to talk for 8 minutes, roughly, each, and so no falling asleep in the back row. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. We're going to be talking about why Britain needs to boost language skills, and at the very end we'll have some questions and answers with them. I'll talk to them a little bit, and then hopefully there'll be some really brilliant questions from all of you, and if not, I'll move you on quickly. I'm going to be absolutely ruthless today. This revolution has a long way to go. We're going to make it happen. Now, first of all, I would like to introduce Baroness Garden, who is one of our favourite people in this whole language show. And she's going to talk basically about the UK public sector, and you're going to explain, you have a slightly different role, but you're here as a personal and professional friend of languages, I think. Do you want to stand at the podium, or I think it's probably yes more comfortable for you. Indeed, yes. No, I can beat this and hold it for you, but I think it worked better. Anyway, welcome to Baroness Garden. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Well, mesdames, messieurs, bonjour, et prenez garde, je vais vous dire 2 mots en français. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui pour discuter le sujet de langue étrangère dans le Royaume-Uni. Ce que je vais dire va continuer la présentation de Jan, mais avec ça, je vais continuer en anglais. Until last week, as Rosie has indicated, a change of plan, I was speaking from the government front benches in the House of Lords on higher education and skills, on education and defence. But I offered to stand down last week after 3 years and let somebody else have some of the fun. And so I'm now speaking to you as a backbench Liberal Democrat peer. And so I am very grateful to the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills, both for their briefing for me when they thought I was going to be here as a minister, and for agreeing me to carry on with this engagement, because actually my lifelong interest, both personal and professional in languages, vastly predates my political involvement. So it is a pleasure to be here. The question why Britain needs to boost language skills might also beg the question whether Britain needs to boost language skills. I don't want to get hearts racing, but Britain's lamentable reputation when it comes to mastering foreign languages is to some extent undeserved. For every traveller abroad whose solution to communication problems is just to speak English more loudly, we can also point to an Edward Fitzgerald or a T. Lawrence, with the skill not only to master languages for which there is little immediate practical use, but also to make them and the cultures they enshrine accessible to other Anglophones. And indeed, some of our most internationally popular authors, including the likes of J.R.R. Tolkien, were linguists who took much of their fictional inspiration from their scholarly work. Many speak of the dominance of English as a 21st century commercial lingua franca, as indeed the Commissioner said in her opening remarks. But within these islands, crofters in the West Highlands can be calling to their sheepdogs in Gaelic, and elsewhere we see the resurgence of Welsh, Cornish and Manx. This is a nation of languages. Here in London alone, census data shows that there are 1.7 million people who do not have English as a first language. More than 100 mother tongues are spoken here, which helps to make this city one of the most vibrant and culturally diverse in the world, and all the richer for that. In part, that is a legacy of empire, and more recently of EU membership. But more importantly, it is symbolic of the country's openness to the rest of the world, not least when it comes to doing business. It's not by chance that London remains a global commercial and financial hub. But when big businesses need language competence, many just go out and hire it, either from this country or from abroad. For small and medium enterprises, especially those seeking to develop an export interest, things can be more difficult. And this is where government can help, and it's one reason why UK Trade and Investment has developed a very wide range of schemes and services to help UK companies succeed in overseas markets, including tailored advice through an export communications review to help optimise their communications overseas. And such help can include an in-house audit of existing language skills, internationalization of websites, which are increasingly important these days, and marketing, literature, and development of a company's strategy to fill language skills gaps and develop existing skills. Language skills, as we know, have a very wide range, from the holidaymaker who requires enough knowledge to order a meal, to the job seeker hoping to be mistaken for a native of another country. All language learners, sooner or later, aspire to that, but very few make it, and very few need to, except perhaps those who aspire to become spies, international criminals, or European Commission officials. The skills for which business cries out fall somewhat short of this. Translation and interpretation services are carried out by specialists and require specialist skills. But the ability to do business in another country often requires just enough knowledge of another language to be polite. Above all, however, it requires the sort of cultural awareness that only the study of another language can teach. And as we've heard from Jan, the government takes languages seriously. At higher levels, we have institutions like the School of Slavonic and East European Studies and the School of Oriental and African Studies, which are both world leaders in their fields, and at a more basic level in schools, colleges, and in the community. So what is being done to promote them? Well, as you know, the coalition started from a low point in 2010. As we've already heard, the last government's decision to downgrade the status of languages in the secondary school curriculum carried long-term negative consequences. And indeed, you might want to ask Tessa Blackstone the reasons behind that decision when she speaks this afternoon, because we really can't explain it. One consequence has been that the numbers of students coming forward to take modern languages at university level continues to fall, but as you heard, there is greater cause for optimism today than for some time. And thanks in part to the new English Baccalaureate, modern language GCSE entries have this year reached their highest level for 5 years. And we hope that that will feed through into the higher levels. In further education, modern languages remain a popular choice, but sometimes as a second chance study option to improve employability. And this may be influenced by the fiercely competitive British and European jobs market, or the UK's recent successful participation in international vocational competitions like World Skills, which was housed this year at the Excel Centre, and where we saw young people from all around the world performing absolutely inspirationally in all sorts of practical skills. Or indeed the Olympic and Paralympic Games, where London was suddenly flooded with all sorts of languages being spoken. So languages may be the subject of informal adult study in a college or in the community for the simple pleasure of learning about another language and culture, and that has value at every level. And the importance of languages in higher education continues to be recognised through the funding system. In England, our funding council has had a policy framework and programme of work in place to sustain strategically important and vulnerable subjects since 2005, and they've made investments to increase and diversify the demand for, to sustain and to reshape the supply of strategically important subjects, such as modern languages. And excitingly, we have just seen the launch of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office Language Centre. Since the last government inexplicably closed the previous centre, the language skills of our diplomats have declined to the detriment of international relations and business. I was hearing a figure the other day that some 90% of our officials serving in countries overseas do not have a knowledge of the language of the countries in which they're sent to serve. And the state-of-the-art centre will, of course, seek to rectify this. I mentioned European commissioners earlier. We know that the UK has a diminishing number of fast-track officials in the EU, in part because of a lack of language proficiency. And the FCO Centre will provide language training to up to 1,000 students a year, including to staff from other government departments, because pretty well every government department will need and have a use for linguists. The Ministry of Defence certainly has, and they have their own language provision at Shrivenham. The Ministry of Justice, where court interpreters are essential in ensuring justice for non-English speakers. The Department for International Development, where people often serve in remote parts of the world where English is unknown. The Department of Health, both with regard to patients and practitioners. I could go on. No Island is an Island summarises the importance of modern language study and the place it should occupy. In a global age, languages are vital for business infrastructure, for economic growth, for international relations, as an agent for peace and prosperity. Languages are an essential part of who we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Baroness Garden. On to our second speaker on this panel, Mrs. Kristina Cunningham, who's sitting next to Baroness Garden, who's Head of Sector Multilingualism Policy at the European Commission. And Kristina will be talking about how language learning contributes to employability and growth, and of course the role of the European Commission. Thank you, Kristina.
Thank you.
Do you want to stand at the podium, or do you want to sit? Of course it is, yes.
Hello? Yes? Okay, yes. Since I'm not a government minister, I'm used to speaking from my chair. So you don't mind.
Nor am I, but I quite like speaking at podiums, actually.
Thank you, Rosie. I would like to start with just a few words about English as a lingua franca. As you probably all know, this is a very recent phenomenon, in fact. Before the Second World War, education beyond basic skills was only attainable for a very small minority of the European population. For this very privileged minority, it was considered absolutely normal to learn foreign languages. It was simply taken for granted that educated people would be able to communicate and work across national borders, regardless of their profession. In the 18th and 19th centuries, French was the most frequently learned modern foreign language in Europe, but that did not prevent educated French people for taking up German and sometimes even English. Today, language teaching and learning is unfortunately in sharp decline all across Europe, and not only in the UK. Learning a foreign language at school, Rosie said you couldn't think of a single reason not to do it, but unfortunately, many kids consider languages rather boring or pretty hard work. There are many reasons for them to not choose learning languages. However, language skills are just still as important for mobility and employability, and indeed for European business today, as they always have been. And that is why, back in 2002, the European heads of states and governments of the EU agreed on a new objective for language teaching in Europe, stating that every child should have the opportunity to learn not only one, but two foreign languages from an early age. Last year, which was more or less 10 years after this famous goal was defined, the European Commission carried out the first ever European survey on language competencies. It's already been mentioned by the Commissioner this morning. It was measuring the level of language proficiency, so what they had actually been able to learn, among some 54,000 15-year-olds in 14 European countries. The results were disappointing, to say the least. They were actually quite shocking. Less than 42% of school kids across Europe had reached the level of independent user, which was then defined as level B1 according to the Common European Framework of References. And you all know that B1 is pas terrible. But only 42% had gotten that far. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is simply and clearly not good enough. We can and we should do a lot better. In a time of economic crisis, with youth unemployment in Europe now over 23% on average, we really need to get much more out of the considerable investments that are made in language teaching in every country in Europe. My unit in the European Commission develops skills strategies for the young and the not so young Europeans. Our policy aims to build on the EU's headline targets, aiming to reduce the number of early school leavers and bring up the numbers of holders of degrees of a tertiary education to at least 40% across Europe. We define key competencies and issue recommendations for how to integrate these in curricula. We monitor changes in level of basic skills, literacy, numeracy, digital competencies, and language skills. We work for easier recognition and more transparency between diplomas and other qualifications, making it possible for learners to switch between education systems and education institutions, both within countries and between countries. Our aim is to create a true European area of skills and qualifications. We do all this because we passionately believe that good education that equips the young with the skills they need for the 21st century is key in the fight against unemployment and also to provide the necessary impetus for growth in Europe. On the policy side, we work together with member states to develop strategies for reforms of our education system. The Commissioner already mentioned this morning that our latest initiative is called Opening Up Education and was launched only last month. That is an appeal to all educational providers to take a big leap into the digital age and start using ICT and new media in the classroom to a much higher extent than they are doing currently. It encourages the use of open educational resources and recognizes the importance of massive open online language courses for large numbers of learners. For language teaching and learning, the implementation of this policy strategy will have a huge impact. As the Commissioner pointed out, here in Britain, the Open University is really a forerunner, showing us how it can be done. But most other higher education institutions and schools across Europe are still miles behind. But that part of the revolution is also surely on its way. Another instrument we have to promote better language competencies is the new EU funding programme for education, training, youth and sports. As the Commissioner said, the member states of Europe have actually agreed to an important increase of almost 40% compared to previous EU education programmes, and that really means something. We shall be able to help millions of learners to go abroad to study or to work. The programme will also help finance innovative projects in the field of language teaching and learning and promote linguistic diversity. You will be able to see examples of such interesting projects during today's walking lunch. Multidisciplinary cross-sectoral partnerships, for example, promoting languages in combination with other transversal competencies, such as digital skills or entrepreneurial thinking, will be an EU priority for funding over the next 7 years. So this new 15 billion euro budget over 7 years for educational programs, it's actually not a huge amount of money when you see it in the large scope. But in combination with strong policy initiatives, a constructive exchange of good practices, bold national reforms, we've heard some initiatives, and a common vision for the future, I believe that we can indeed build a Europe where many more of our citizens are well educated, multilingual, and can make the most of their future and indeed of Europe's potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristina Cunningham. And Kristina's Swedish, as you may know, and I'm really excited to learn that she actually used to be a manager at IKEA. And you must show me how to put those flat packs together. I know everybody must say that, but anyway. No, it's very exciting. You're actually going to be talking about brands and languages, aren't you, during the labels and so on. You're going to be talking further at the language show, I believe. Tomorrow. Yep. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And sorry, this is for later. We're going to move on to David Bearfield now, and we're going to keep in the European frame of thinking and mode of thinking. And we're going to hear, David's going to talk about, he's the director of European Personnel Selection. The office is called EPSO, and he's going to talk about the European institutions as employers. And you're looking for language learners, I hear.
If we can find them. So, good morning, everyone. I'm the director of European Personnel Selection Office, and it's our task to find staff for all of the European Union institutions in a huge variety of roles, from secretaries, conference interpreters, translators, lawyer linguists, policy officers, and a whole range of specialist tasks. And we're recruiting from across the European Union. My journey perhaps began on this island, living on an island, within an island, and from my school bus every day on a clear day, we could actually see France as one of the few places in England where you could look out and see the continent. It was somewhere, I think we had, where I come from, perhaps a closer relationship, because people would literally go off on the hovercraft, for anyone who's old enough to remember hovercraft. 35 minutes and you were in France for the day. And this was a regular kind of feature in my youth, and we went over with trolleys and shopping bags and brought back as much beer and wine and cigarettes as you could carry, all for personal consumption, I hasten to add, or at least not all mine. And I was lucky enough to go to a school with some pretty inspirational French and German teachers who actually wrote the books that all the other kids in the UK used. And having that great inspirational teaching was really that made me pick up languages. And I did languages at O-level, I did languages at A-level, I did languages at university, and have carried on learning languages since then. And it's been, I can only really say how important it is for people's career. I was one of the first people who joined the European Fast Stream when it was first set up in the UK as a young civil servant in the transport department. And I was sent off fairly regularly to Brussels to negotiate the liberalisation of the European air transport market in the early 90s. And my colleagues discovered it was extremely useful to have me along as kind of not just the bag carrier, but the person who could speak to the French and the German and other delegations in their own languages. And they discovered that you could actually get far more understanding and make progress if you actually spoke people's languages. So I discovered in my very first job, really, as a civil servant, how useful it was having studied languages, and it's certainly something that helped me ever since. Even learning Swedish, which I did fairly recently, helped me understand what all those things mean, and the names they give to the furniture in the IKEA shops. But some of them are very strange indeed, I can tell you. But it's interesting that Rosie talked about international criminals and spies. These and other identities I have used in answer to the question, if I ever get in the back of a London taxi and you get the question, so Gov, what do you do? Because I learned once or twice that the answer not to give is I work for the European Commission. You find you're going on the Tour de London and you get harangued for an hour about how awful that Europe place is. But on a more serious note, we really have a very serious issue in trying to get Brits to come and work for the EU institutions. And I don't think it's about Euroscepticism. I don't think that the young people coming out of university are a particularly Eurosceptic part of the population. It's not about horizons. It's really about lack of language ability, I think, is the number one break on getting Brits to apply and apply successfully for the many interesting jobs there are actually on offer in the EU institutions. I'll give you just one or two figures. We don't have quotas, so it's just selection on people's merit, but we do have a duty to help the institutions maintain a geographical balance amongst all of the staff of the 28 member states of the Union. And the UK makes up just over 12% of the population of the European Union. And we have somewhere around 5% of EU staff are from the United Kingdom. The difficulty is around half of them are going to be retiring over the next 5 years. So the number is going to diminish even more sharply. And how many people apply? Well, any guesses the percentage of the applicant pool that come from the UK? 12% is our percentage of population. 8, 1, 3. Well, the lower end, unfortunately, is the closer one. It's somewhere between 1 and just over 2%, depending on what we're trying to select. So incredibly low. So the UK is really at the end of the train. We're the worst performers by share of population of any member state of the European Union. And we're working very hard, I have to say, with the UK government, who are very engaged in doing an awful lot of work. We have a system of careers ambassadors. We have the largest number of EU careers ambassadors at UK universities, and they are spreading the word. The EU has been ranked in the Times top 100 graduate employers at number 58 this year. We were, after last year, or before last year, we were never in the top 100, and I guess not in the top 1,000. In the Guardian top 300 graduate employers in the UK, we weren't in the top 300 last year, and this year the EU has come in at number 30. So there are clear signs that the work that we have been doing together with the UK government and the Parliament and the Commission's offices in the UK is starting to bear some serious fruit, and we hope that this will lead to an increase in the numbers of applications from UK nationals. But it's really very, very important to have those language skills and to encourage people, which is why it was so sad when this requirement was taken away to learn languages up to GCSE level in the mid-2000s. And that really was the point where things started to fall very sharply off a cliff, and we see university departments having closed or in the process of closing all over the country, and it's really very, very difficult to find those people. Why is it useful? Well, for us, even though in the institutions, of course, we don't all walk around speaking 24 languages to each other every day, multilingualism is right at the heart of what we do. Obviously, for those staff who are in one of the linguistic services, and we have one of the largest and most professional series of linguistic services for interpreters and translators and lawyer linguists in the world, and we have some extremely talented men and women who work in there, and we're constantly looking to bring in the next generation of people with very high level of language skills. But language proficiency is also important for everyone else who works in the EU institutions in our daily work. We're interacting with society across Europe, with citizens, with organizations, with member state governments. And it's really essential to speak some of those languages, to be able to interact with people in their own language. So you don't just have to have the requirement to have one foreign language to join the institutions. You're actually obliged to learn a second foreign language if you're a member of our staff before you can actually be promoted. So that's a very powerful incentive if one were needed on our staff. But what we discover that people working in institutions soon discover the pleasures of learning other languages and being able to practice them on a daily basis. So we really hope that we will be able to benefit from what I see as finally a turning of the tide in the UK on language learning. We've got a long way to go, but I think there's progress being made, and I hope that we will be able to bring the number of applicants coming seeking work for the EU institutions to somewhere approximating the UK's share of the European Union population. And we will continue to work very hard with all the services in the EU, with the UK government, with higher education and other actors to see that that's the case. But for those of you who are in the language business, and I'm sure many of you are, if we all work together, I think we can sell the benefits. And the benefits from the UK economy as a whole, I think, will be very considerable for those that come to work with us, but the many who will be able to use their language skills, as I have done, more or less every day in my working life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to David Bearfield. And I think you've got a few new recruits in the audience. First of all, I saw heads in hands at that terrible percentage. And then I felt a kind of revolutionary zeal build up. I definitely did. But anyway, I'm sure that everybody here supports that initiative. Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely fascinating talks, and I think you agree. We have two more speakers on this panel, and our next speaker has the most fantastic and fascinating job. It's Professor of Multilingual Business Communication. Now, every university should have one, I think. This is Professor Stephen Hagen, and he's going to talk about why Britain needs to boost language skills for economic reasons.
Я только что приехал из России, и без знания русского языка было бы очень трудно I just got back from Russia, where I'm helping to commercialize and entrepreneurial, I can't even say the word now, entrepreneurialize a Russian university. Without speaking Russian, it would have been absolutely impossible to go and work over in Russia. But even with many years of studying Russian, I made an unfortunate faux pas recently, because I shook hands with somebody wearing my gloves and was immediately told that we don't do that here. You know, he looked very sternly at me and said, you know, it's a question about how you actually be friendly. You need to be friendly to people. Take your gloves off, please. And so, you know, after many, many years, the cultural side is still very important in terms of how you communicate with people around the world. But the few minutes I have today, I wish to really talk about one or two of the critical findings from research which has been carried out over the last 7 years, going back to the LAN report, but also looking more recently at the Pimlico report, which was produced by the European Commission, DGEAC, and which looks at the whole issue of what you might call super-performing companies with language management strategies. And I want to say a few words finally about the more recent research I've undertaken in the UK over the last year with colleagues from Surrey and UWE in Bristol, where we've looked at 100 UK exporters to see what's happening currently at the current time of recession within the United Kingdom. So let me say a few words then about the importance of the language management strategy. What we've discovered, I think largely within the LAN report, which we wrote about 5-6 years ago now, that the companies who were really performing extremely well had already thought through the issues of languages, and that includes, of course, UK exporters as well. And they had come up with a prior management plan or strategy for handling language and cultural barriers. And they'd done this extremely effectively. And in the research, which was really the first piece of research which made a connection between the importance of languages and economic and business growth, we found that there were 4 particular features which could be correlated with business growth in terms of exporting within particular companies. And that was, A, they understood the issue of languages. In other words, they thought through that they needed to have some kind of a plan or strategy in place for languages. Secondly, they were starting to appoint native speakers. Thirdly, they were recruiting local agents who could use languages and handle the language problems, so they'd started to send language problems to the local agent to sort out. And finally, they were using professional interpreters and translators, and that was to obtain the accuracy required, for example, within the websites, within the translations of their sales literature, and so on. The work also started to generate other interesting findings from around Europe, indeed around the world as well, which pointed to the language barrier being measurable as the equivalent of a tariff or a tax upon companies. And this was found to be of the order of 15 to 22%, as high as 22% in terms of acting as a brake upon the process of exporting your goods and your services abroad. If we now look at the companies that took part in the Pimlico study, as I say, sponsored by the European Commission, then we found that when we looked at them as top-performing companies, we found that 43% of these top-performing companies reported that they had increased their turnover by 25% by introducing a language management strategy. And with this particular group of these top-performing multilingual European companies, they identified 3 particular features which they said were critical in managing the language strategy. That was, first of all, multilingual and multicultural website adaptation. Secondly, recruitment and mobility of native speakers. And thirdly, intensively using local agents to handle language problems. So those 3 were really important. And with the notion of the website, that has become increasingly more important even over the last few years, since Pimlico was undertaken in 2011, because of the importance of designing the website so that it appears local. And many of the mistakes which standard, if you like, conventional exporters are making within the technological age is they're simply doing a literal translation of the text within the website without thinking carefully about navigation, use of symbols, selection of photographs, and whether you use oval design versus box and rectangular design, all of these have an important impact upon the customer. And it's those companies who recognize the importance of website change and development who actually are making creating serious growth for their company in export terms, at a time when we need exports to be highly active and proactive in order to push the recession away from all of our respective European countries. And as we started to look at one or two of what I would call the super-duper SMEs who were trading abroad, we noticed that they were collecting whole ranges of language measures into an extremely comprehensive strategy. Let me just read to you a list of the measures which were being undertaken by a company in Central Europe with regard to overcoming language and cultural barriers. And some of them you'll recognize anyway, but I mean, it's the range of measures which I think is highly significant. First of all, they used local agents to solve their language problems. Secondly, they developed culturally, most important, and linguistically adapted websites in at least 3 languages. So they had at least 3 languages available on those different websites. They were undertaking linguistic audits of their needs to identify how to solve the gaps within their companies. They're using professional translators and interpreters. They're translating their promotional, sales, and technical material. They're offering language training and cultural briefing schemes, including online language learning. They were instituting a polyglot employee selection and recruitment process. They encouraged cross-border staff mobility, adopted buddying and secondment systems to link different people from different cultures and languages together so they would learn from each other. They were forging, and of course very important for me as someone within the university sector, forging really important, resilient, long-term links with universities in order to obtain highly qualified students on placement to open new markets. Let me give you a quick example, which one of the ones that we found, is that one company had used 2 French business school students to open up the French market for them. And these 2 students had only been there 3 months, and they already had started to obtain export sales for the company in France, which was an entirely new market for that particular company. Encouraging native speaker recruitment, and then planning e-commerce underpinned by multilingual operations. So multilingual e-commerce, one of the critical areas as well. And in more recent studies, 2010, for example, we found that there was a lack of suitably qualified personnel in terms of the number of languages which they could handle. Although companies found that when asked, are languages a serious brake upon your exporting? This is for the European group of companies in the IES study. On a scale of 5, most companies rated it as 2.2, but for those companies who had already started exporting, it was identified as 2.9 on a scale of 5. So for those who'd actually got fully into exporting, they discovered then, of course, that language barriers were far more important than those that had not. I want to finish with a few words on what is happening in the UK at the moment with UK industry. And a group of us undertook a study called Arctic, which has a website. And as I said, it was organised through UE in Bristol, Surrey University, and University of Newport, Wales. What were the distinctive features over the last 12 months when this study has taken place? Well, first of all, there's been a significant shift in UK perception of the importance of language barriers and issues compared with 2005 when the original ELAN data were collected, and this set of data includes a number of those ELAN companies as well. That 17% of these exporters had developed a language strategy. In ELAN, it had actually been 2%. So you can see there's been a shift, I think, over the last 7 years within the United Kingdom. A total of 29% in the latest piece of work thought they had actually lost contractual opportunities, in other words, business and trade, by not having language skills. In the ELAN UK sample, it was 5%. So the kind of changes which are taking place, much greater awareness. And in terms of cultural issues, we in Elan only found that 1% of UK companies declared they had lost a contract for cultural reasons. In the last 12 months, we found 10% had said they had lost a contract for cultural reasons. And I suppose one of the most interesting aspects of the work over the last 12 months has been a sudden shift at emphasis in the geography of trade for many UK companies. They see the European market as flat. It's not going to grow for them, hasn't been growing. And so there's been enormous emphasis put particularly on South America, Spanish and Portuguese, and also, of course, a move towards the BRIC countries far more than we've seen in the past: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So we have to, in a sense, also recognize that our languages need to keep up with the pace of change. And when I first started doing these studies now about 25 years ago, small and medium-sized companies in this country were saying, yes, we trade with 2 or 3 countries. Now, of course, they're saying we trade with 10, we trade with 12, we trade with 15. So how do small companies in particular cope with those kinds of changes which are taking place through globalization? And the answer is that, as we've developed through all of these studies, is the importance of this strategy, a strategic approach, a management strategy, whereby companies can deal with the language problems by selecting a range of different measures in order to do so. And we now know that those who do that, and do that systematically, are going to be the most successful over the next 10 years.
Thank you very much.